Welcome back to Introduction to Networking. We will continue along this path. Yes. Do we have a question?
I need the link, please.
You need the what? You need the link?
Yes, please.
Oh no. All right. Here we go. There we go. All right. So we're never going to miss a question on plenum, right? I think I've driven that point home enough. All right, here we go. Fiber optic utilizes light to transmit data instead of electricity. Everything else is utilizing copper wire, obviously with the exception of Wi-Fi, but we haven't gotten there yet. So utilizing light, it's immune to electromagnetic interference. Any magnet strong enough to affect light, I don't want to be anywhere near, because it's probably going to do pretty bad things long before it affects the light. So EMI does not affect fiber optics. How it is put into the cable, it is either utilizing a laser or an LED in order to push the light through the tube. Here's how the tube is essentially set up. You have an outer jacket. You have a piece of plastic essentially to add strength to it, so that it's not as prone to breaking. There is the cladding, which helps keep the light in pocket, essentially moving along the tube. And then you have the coating over the fiber optic, and then you have the core, which is what the light's going to travel along. If you are ever working with fiber optics, even if you cannot see the light on your hand or whatever, do not point it at your eyes. That is like instant damage to your corneas and retinas. If that is working, it may not be within the visible light spectrum. All right. So it gets injected in by lasers or LEDs, pushes that light over much larger distances or longer distances than you can with a copper wire. Sometimes many kilometers. There's two basic categories of fiber we need to be aware of. We talked about it this morning briefly. We have multi-mode fiber and single mode fiber. Single mode fiber gets much higher speeds over much longer distances, but it costs a lot more. And then you have multi-mode, high speed at medium distances, but it can allow multiple streams of data to be pushed on a line at the same time, utilizing typically LEDs. Single mode is usually laser, multi-mode is usually LED. What they'll do in order to push multiple streams of data down an LED is they will have different color lights, and each light will represent a data stream. So it kind of looks like this. You have multicolored lights going through, bouncing through, and then they can come out the other side. So you have multiple streams going through a single line. Single mode, one stream, but it goes a lot further. I think the farthest you can get is roughly about 40 kilometers. And then the signal has to be repeated or replicated. Questions so far on fiber optics?
I have a question.
Okay.
It's not on fiber optics. It was like on the twisted pair, but the channel got cut off, so I didn't get the chance to ask. But no, it was a general question, like, because I was reading the book, and then it said that they are prone to, like, you know, people can like hack them and listen on, like, or I don't know, like I was trying to understand what they meant.
You can
like,
tap into a twisted pair line, yes. Remember we were talking about the vampiric connector for a coaxial, where it's like the spike goes in and touches the copper?
Yeah.
You can do the same thing on this because it's copper wire. So you can actually pierce into each of the wires, making that connection, and then you can actually listen in on the data on the line.
Oh.
And you can do that without alerting the person on the other end.
Okay, so you would have to physically like try to like put a spike on it though.
Well, you would physically have to have access to the wires, and then you can add, you know, something to it to be able to listen to the line. So you could cut a little bit of the cladding away. You can see your wires, you can put them in, and then you can clip into the wires, and you now can listen in on the lines.
Okay, yeah, that's crazy. Okay, no, I
Now,
understand. Thank you.
Fiber optics, you can't do that. So you can
Right.
do it with, you can do that with twisted pair without interrupting the signal. Fiber optic, you would actually have to sever the line and then create a junction and a replicator. That would be known once that was done. If the data line gets cut like that, they'll notice.
Okay.
And there actually are tools where you can actually run a signal down the line and see how far down the line the break is, so they'll know exactly where the break happened. So for security reasons, yes, fiber optic is a better choice for security.
Okay.
Good question.
Yes,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly, so is it like the color, is it the color like supposed to be like early you was shown like the blue, and then is it like if you say that it's supposed to be the blue cable goes with the orange cable, if you like mismatch and stuff, is still gonna be work, or like if you
Well, if you do it and it doesn't work, then you can just switch it and try again, and then you'll know.
Okay.
So yeah, you may not get it right the first time, but you're likely to get it right on the second one. So you try it and you're like, oh, that's not working, and then you can flip it around and then it will.
Okay.
So yes. All right. So that's our fiber optics. Here are our fiber optic details. They do have this for coax and for twisted pair as well. They go under what are called Ethernet standards. Do you need to know these? Unfortunately, yes, you do. So you have your multi-mode is broken down into 3. Here's the easy way to look at it. The first number you see right here before base, that's your speed in megabits per second. So 100 is 100 megabits per second. 1000, 1000 megabits per second. 10G, 10 gigabits per second. So always remember that number up front, that is your network speed. So what you need to pay attention to is the piece on the end. The nice thing is single mode is long haul. That's your longer distances. Both start with L for long haul. So you have LX and LR. So L for long haul. SX, FX, and SR, short haul and multi-mode. But again, speed is up front. The acronym in the back tells you whether it is multi-mode or single mode, and then you can compare that to your distances that you can run. Yes, Modena.
I wanted to ask about the question that was asked this morning. There was this particular question about this fiber optics cable,
Okay.
where it was asking whether it was multi-mode or single mode. I can't remember what the question was.
We could probably go back and revisit that question. I think they were saying which one has a longer distance, like a longer run. And if it was, which one was a longer run, it would be single mode.
Yeah, you just said. All right.
And because it can go 2 kilometers to 10 kilometers versus 300 meters to 2 kilometers. Yes, Greg.
Yeah, I was just asking, will there ever be a, would they ever throw any? See, the thing is, I can recognize these in multiple choice, right? But if they
Yes.
throw something else in there, like, let's see,
You mean,
FR.
would they throw
Yeah.
Ethernet in there or a?
No, mean
or
something that
coax?
just made up. Like, for example, they'll, would they ever put like 100 base SX versus 1000 base SX? You know what I mean? Like, would they ever try to mix it up where?
Not that bad, because that would catch way too many people.
Okay.
you know, because the goal isn't to intentionally make you fail.
Okay.
You know, but like, would they put something made up in there? Possibly, but it wouldn't necessarily be something that close to
That
like
close.
intentionally try to fool you.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
Good question. All right. So yes, please take a screenshot of this, add it to your study sets. I have an entire study set just on cables for stuff like this because of, you know, the 10, you know, the 100 base FX and all that stuff going through coax, Ethernet, all that stuff. Because for Network Plus, you have to be very familiar with it. You have to be relatively familiar with it for A+. All right. Fiber optic connectors. A couple of these you might be familiar with already. We talked about them when we did the Jamboard not too long ago. You have your ST or straight tip connector, and it uses that same bayonet BNC type connector on it, where you have that one side is T, one side has notches in it. They go in and they twist and lock together, and it holds them in place. And it has the fiber cladding actually sticks out for a little bit outside of the connector itself. It's called the straight tip. The next one is the square connector. SC has a fun little square end to the connector itself, so it's pretty easy to identify. And then you have the LC, which is the Lucient connector. LC, you can see the little tab on it, makes a nice little L, makes it easy to identify. And then we have the fun one of the group, which is the MTRJ. Easiest way to spot it is 2 fiber strands working together. So it's 2 strands on the same connector. And it's also a small form factor, so it is much smaller than the others. So MTRJ, 2 cables together. Questions so far? Pretty straightforward on these. Take a screenshot, what have you.
What does MTRJ mean?
MTRJ, what does it mean?
Yeah.
It means 2 connectors, man. What are you talking about?
Multi something, right?
Yeah, I'm looking it up. I can't remember it off the top of my head. Mechanical transfer register jack.
Okay, thank you.
I had to consult my coworker. I think ST is for single mode. If I'm not mistaken. No, ST can do both, single or multi. All right. Question time. See here, Gamal, can you please tell us what type of connector are we looking at for number 1? All right, Jamari, can you please tell us what connector we have for number 1?
Can you repeat that?
Sure. What type of connector do we have here for number 1?
Can I call someone?
You want to give it a shot?
No, I have no idea.
Looks like a box.
Guessing from chat and the ST.
Let's see.
Ooh, let's see. Square connector. Has a square front. See, we got the boxy shape up front. So SC gives us a square connector. All right. Number 2. Yuki, can you please tell us what we got? So down here.
RJ45.
So what?
RJ45.
RJ45? Not quite. Let's see, Tomas. We're not looking for the cable, we're looking for the connector. Kamal, what kind of connector do we have down here?
BNC connector.
BNC, very good. So bayonet, Neil Councilman, BNC. Very good. Job. Let's see, Danielle, can you please tell us what number 3 is? If you're available, if not, I think she's away right now. Give me a second.
I can do it. I think it's a R. Is that the what is it? RJ11, I believe.
I believe you are absolutely correct.
Thank you.
RJ11. Very good. Let's see here. Joyce, can you tell us what number 4 is right here in the bottom center?
Is that a straight tip connector, ST?
It absolutely is a straight tip connector. Very good. Good job. Stephanie, can you let us know what number 5 is up here?
The ALC?
It is absolutely the LC. And Kevin, can you tell us what number 6 is down here, bottom right?
Is that the RJ45?
That absolutely is the RJ45. Man, y'all are making me feel good about today. It wasn't all torture, just most of it. Good job, everyone. Good deal. All right, real quick, we went over these probably in T1 or T2, something along those lines, but it's good to just kind of review them real quick. So here you have what is a crimper tool. So once you have lined out those cables and you've gone cross-eyed trying to put those little cables in the tiny little plastic connector for your shielded twisted pair, unshielded twisted pair cables, you have to put them in here, and you can see you have 2 different kinds of holes here. One is for an RJ45, one is for an RJ11. So You get them threaded into that little plastic connector, you stick it in there, and then you clamp down on it. And what it does is it drives these little copper like blades down into the wires so that it pierces them so that the connector itself becomes active. But this is how you would connect the connector to the wire. On the other side, if we're setting up an outlet or what have you, we have to get those wires into the receptacle to be able to receive that connector. So we would use what is called a punch down tool. And typically we would put these in what's called a 110 block in the server room before we would move it over to the switch. But the punch down tool kind of looks like this, and then it's got like a little U shape and then a blade on one side. And so when you're pushing it down into the connector, one side is a thin mechanism that kind of pushes it down in. The blade on the other side cuts the other end of the wire off so that it's nice and neat in there. I have a nice little video where the guy goes through it and shows him walking through and doing a full punch down block like this so that it kind of makes sense. You got to make sure you have it pointed in the right direction so you don't have it cut off the wrong end of the wire. It happens. But this is a tool you would use on the other side when you're creating the receptacle. This side would be for adding the connector to the wire. These are two pretty prominent networking tools you would see. Questions so far? All right, here's kind of what it looks like up close. But again, like I said, I got a video. So if you have it pointed the wrong direction, the blade will cut off the interior part of the wire instead of the piece that's kind of hanging off on the outside. And if you look, you can kind of see the colors in there. It tells you what color wires go which direction depending on how you have it set up. So it actually gives you a little guide inside these blocks as you're making them. But next week, I'll show you a video of a guy doing this, a guy named Mike Myers. He has a pretty good video of creating these little receptacles or whatever using the punch down blocks. All right. Two other tools that we saw before, just reminding ourselves of it. The multimeter, where we can check for what's called continuity to see if the signal is actually getting through the wire itself. Or we can check voltages on wires. If we are running what's called PoE, which is called power over Ethernet, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then we have the toner and probe, which is also called what? Who remembers this one?
The Hound and Fox.
Exactly, Stephanie. Fox and Hound. So that's our toner and our probe, where we would plug in one wire here. It would send a musical tone down that wire, and we can trace that wire all the way into the server room and know exactly which wire it is that goes to that particular one. Only caveat with this is if it goes into a switch, the switch eats the signal. So once that tone enters the switch, it's gone. So you have to catch it before it enters the switch. So you can hear it before the switch, but nowhere after. Next. Loop back plug. Looks just like a cutoff connector. And basically what they've done is they've taken the two outbound wires from the computer and looped it back into the two inbound wires on the computer on the Ethernet card. So when you plug it in, it creates this never-ending loop of communication. And the only purpose this plug serves is to make sure the NIC is functioning. Your network card is operational. So you plug one in, you see the lights start blinking on your computer, you know the NIC is working. You can unplug it. The diagnostic tool has done its job. We have a software version of this, which is the loopback address, which we will talk about Monday. And that's the 127.0.0.1 address, but we will get to that on Monday. Lastly, we have our cable tester. which the cable tester, its main purpose is after you've created a cable and you want to make sure that that cable, like you did all your connections properly, you didn't cross any of them over, any of that fun stuff. You can plug one end of the cable in here, one end of the cable in the other side, and these two pieces disconnect from each other so they don't have to be right next to each other. And you see these little dots running along the cable here? Well, it will run a pulse down every single line one at a time and tell you which connection it came out on the other end. So you can make sure one matches up with one, two matches up with two, three matches up with three. It's testing the cable on each individual line of the twisted pair to make sure it all lines up. That's all it does. So cable tester, test the cables. That's it. They have much fancier versions of this that have a lot of bells and whistles and do all kinds of funky stuff and, you know, really, really, you know, neat things. They're also significantly more expensive. You could pick up something like this for like $5. And it does the job just fine. All right. Last thing, I promise. Last thing. So we need to know the difference between a straight through cable and a crossover cable. Straight through, all that means which format you use on one side, which would be like, you know, this is T568A. If you use A on one side of the cable, use A on the other side of the cable. They're the exact same on both sides. That's all that means, straight through or patch cable. The standard you use on one side is the same as the standard you use on the other of the cable. Crossover cable switches the standards. So one side would be T568A, the other side would be T568B. That's what makes a crossover cable. What you're doing is you're taking the output of one and plugging it into the input of the other so they can talk. Because otherwise you have the output going to the output and they're both screaming at each other and they can't hear, right? So you're going from the output of one to the input of the other. So if you wanted to connect two computers together without using a switch, you have to use a crossover cable. Anybody have the original Xbox? Am I the only one old enough to have had the original Xbox?
I still had one, but I give it to my my nephew.
I still have mine.
Okay, original Xbox. Do you remember the fancy cable they sold you that cost like $40 to be able to connect two Xboxes together? It was the Microsoft X cable. They charged everybody $40 for this cable so you can plug two Xboxes together. All it was a crossover cable that you could have picked up for like $3. That's all it was. Nothing proprietary, nothing fancy, just a crossover cable so two computers could talk to each other. More often than not, it's nice to have one of these in your bag. Like if you're on a flight and you have a coworker and you want to connect and transfer files and stuff like that, you can do that. You can use a crossover cable, much easier. You usually use it for two switches to talk together. I know they have technology where they do auto sense now, but typically if you were going to plug two switches together, you'd use a crossover cable so they could talk. But that's all it is. So straight through, if one side is A, the other side is A. Crossover, if one side is B, the other side is A. And it's so we can connect two computers together without a switch. Any questions on that? Does that make sense? Because we're crossing over the outputs to the inputs. So crossover, the reason it works is we're taking the output of one computer and putting it to the input of the other computer and vice versa. That's why we're crossing over. So we're not having the outputs try to talk to the outputs because that won't work on computers. So the out has to go into the in of the other. So we cross over the cable. That's why they call it a crossover. versus a straight through or patch cable is the same on both sides.
Okay, so that would be like inside of the twisted wire, like when
Well,
you
this would
like
be
put
in the
it-
connector when you make the connector. Remember when we come back to here, when we're making the connectors, right here, when we're making the connector, putting it on the end of the cable, we line the
Right.
wires up in this way. So we would do A on one side, B on the other.
Ah, okay, okay.
If it's a patch cable, one side is A, the other side is A. So it's going
Okay.
straight through. Make sense?
Yeah.
Congratulations, we've made it to the end of this wonderful and amazing and epic technical session. We should now be able to define a network and give examples. I know it seems like an eternity ago when we talked about topologies, but I promise you it was just this morning. We should be able to identify devices on the networks, the router, the switch, the hub, bridge, identify some network cables and connectors. RJ45, start using the technical names for them. RG6, RJ45, MTRJ, and recognize some of our most common network tools. Do we have any questions, comments?
Can you just go back to the other slide just so I can look at the picture a little bit?
Which one? This one?
Yeah, just
Take a screenshot.
okay.
It will help. I know they have a version of this in the book as well, but they also get into rollover cables, which you don't really need to know that for the A+.
All right, got it. Thank you.
No problem.